Why did the courtyard fall silent the moment she stepped through the gate? Not a word, not a shuffle of boots, just stillness. The kind that settles when something unseen moves through a room. She wasn't the highest in rank. She wasn't decorated in medals. But the weight she carried wasn't stitched onto fabric. It was in her eyes. The men and women standing there, young recruits, seasoned veterans, even the staff officer leaning against the wall with his clipboard, shifted uneasily. Their orders came from the chain of command. But their silence, their hesitation came from something else. From her. Her name was Captain Elena Navarro, call sign Raven. Some whispered that she had once refused an order, that a mission went sideways, lives were lost, and the truth had been buried. Others said she had gone dark for nearly a year, living between borders, surfacing only when war threatened to consume villages no one would ever read about in the news. What was fact and what was rumor didn't matter. What mattered was the presence that followed her, stronger than any command barked over a radio. She scanned the courtyard, stone walls weathered from years of rain, the faint scent of oil from the armory, dust shifting under boots, and her gaze landed on the wounded lined up against the far bench. Fresh faces, still learning the cost of the uniform. One clutched his bandaged shoulder, another stared into the gravel as though ashamed of surviving when his friend hadn't. Her jaw tightened. They didn't need speeches, they needed something else, but she didn't speak, not yet. The officer cleared his throat. "Captain Navarro will brief you," he said, words stiff, like he'd rather hand the task to anyone else. Elena stepped forward, boots striking stone. 1, 2, 3, every step echoed. She didn't raise her voice when she finally spoke. She didn't have to. "You think you're ready because you trained, because you memorized procedures, because you carry a weapon." Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air. "But what you carry inside, that's what decides whether you make it back." Her gaze lingered on one of the recruits, a boy who looked barely 20. His knuckles whitened around his rifle. She saw the fear behind his defiance. She had worn that look once, long ago, before she knew what fear really meant. "But there's something you don't know," she said quietly, almost like confessing a secret. Her pause stretched long enough for every ear to strain. "Not yet." The officer shifted, uncomfortable. He wanted her to deliver instructions, coordinates, mission outlines. Instead, she gave them silence. She let them wrestle with it, because silence told truths words never could. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to another courtyard years ago. A different group of soldiers. A mission she still carried like shrapnel embedded too deep to remove. She could almost hear the rain that fell that night, the sound of her own breath as she made a choice that could never be undone. And as she stood there now, with these young eyes waiting on her, she wondered if she was about to make the same mistake again. A cough broke the stillness. One of the medics adjusted his satchel, eyes darting to her and then away. Another soldier, a woman with a scar tracing her jawline, shifted her stance and asked, "Ma'am, what do you mean by that?" Elena's eyes softened just slightly. She studied the scarred woman, brave enough to ask what the others only thought. "I mean," Elena said, "there are truths about combat that you won't find in your manuals, things no instructor can prepare you for." The young recruits leaned forward almost imperceptibly, hungry, afraid. "You'll think courage is pulling the trigger," Elena continued. "Sometimes it is, but more often it's not pulling it. It's staying still when every nerve in you screams to move. It's keeping your eyes open when you want to close them. It's carrying weight no one else sees and not letting it break you." Her words hung in the cool air. No theatrics, just truth, raw and unvarnished. The scarred woman swallowed, and for a second her hand brushed the fabric of her uniform as though remembering her own weight. The officer exhaled sharply. "Captain, with respect, we have a schedule. The recruits are waiting for the operation briefing." His tone was clipped, rehearsed, but behind it Elena caught something else. Impatience, yes, but also unease. She turned to him, met his eyes, And in that quiet exchange, she realized he feared her too, not because of authority, but because she carried stories no one wanted spoken aloud. The recruits glanced between them, sensing the tension. One of the wounded on the bench shifted painfully, sucking in air through his teeth. The sound dragged Alina back into the moment. She spoke again, her voice even lower this time. "You want your operation briefing? Fine, but understand something first. No mission ever goes the way it's drawn on paper. You'll be asked to choose between orders and instinct, between duty and conscience, between saving yourself or someone else. And that's the choice that follows you, long after the war ends." A beat of silence. Only the distant sound of boots on gravel from another unit marching somewhere outside the walls. The young recruit with the whitened knuckles finally whispered, almost against his will, "And what if you make the wrong choice?" Alina looked at him for a long moment, and the courtyard seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer. Her chest tightened because she remembered asking that same question once. She remembered the answer too. "You live with it," she said. Her voice didn't waver, but it carried something heavier than certainty. Regret. The officer snapped his folder shut. "That's enough. Recruits dismissed until 1800 hours." He didn't want more, didn't want her bleeding ghosts into their green ears. The soldiers hesitated, then dispersed in slow steps, murmurs carrying across the courtyard. But the words she had spoken clung to them. She could see it in their eyes, not confusion, not defiance, something else. Reflection. The scarred woman lingered. So did the boy with the knuckles. And Alina knew those were the ones who had truly heard her. When the courtyard finally emptied, Alina stayed behind. The wounded were helped away, the officer retreated, and the silence deepened until it was just her and the fatting sun. She let out a slow breath. Her hand brushed the edge of her sleeve, fingertips tracing the fabric where her insignia sat. She thought of the mission years ago, the courtyard soaked in rain, the faces of men she hadn't saved, and the voice that haunted her still. "Why didn't you act?" The air was cooler now. Shadows stretched long across the stone. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight settle. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Something that tied her to this place, to these recruits, to the mission ahead. And when they learned it, everything would change. Why was she summoned back after all this time? That question followed her as she walked the narrow halls of the outpost later that evening, boots clicking against the worn concrete floors. The air was heavy with the smell of gun oil and reheated rations, a far cry from the places she used to vanish into when she left the uniform behind. They had pulled her back, not with ceremony, but with a single order delivered quietly through a channel that should have been closed to her years ago. She didn't ask why, not yet. Instead, she walked with steady steps toward the briefing room. Voices echoed ahead, low, uneasy. She pushed the door open. Inside, the recruits she had spoken to earlier now sat around a long table, shoulders squared, eyes restless. The scarred woman leaned forward, listening intently as if trying to catch details that weren't being shared. The boy with the tense knuckles sat stiffly, staring at the table's scratched surface. He looked like he was holding his breath, like he thought if he exhaled, the whole fragile room would break. At the far end stood the officer again, posture rigid, briefing documents spread out in neat lines. He glanced at Alina but didn't welcome her. His eyes flicked to her like one checks a shadow, acknowledging its presence but wishing it wasn't there. She ignored him. She always had a talent for that. The projector hummed to life, throwing grainy satellite images onto the wall. Dusty terrain, a mountain ridge scarred by old bomb craters, the outline of a valley threaded with dirt roads. "Intelligence suggests a weapons transfer is moving through here," the officer said, voice clipped. "We've tracked convoys for weeks. This one is different, heavier guarded, possibly carrying stolen tech, possibly experimental. Command wants it stopped before it reaches the border." He pointed at the map, tracing lines with a stiff finger. "Two teams will converge here, north and south. Ambush point, intercept, retrieve whatever's inside. The recruits leaned closer, pens scratching notes they'd never read again. The scarred woman frowned. "What's the margin for error?" she asked. The officer hesitated. "Minimal." A murmur spread. Minimal margin meant casualties. The boy with the tense knuckles shifted in his chair, swallowing hard. Alina stood at the back, arms crossed. She watched their faces, not the maps. She saw the nerves hidden beneath bravado. She saw the way one soldier's foot tapped, restless. The way another bit his lip until it bled. She remembered being them. "Questions?" the officer asked, his tone final. Alina stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. The projector light caught the sharp angle of her jaw as she stopped beside the table. "What aren't you telling them?" The officer's jaw tightened. "Captain Navarro, we're on a strict—" "No," she cut in. Her voice was low, but it carried weight. "You said possibly experimental. That's not a throwaway line, not with this much protection around a convoy." The recruits glanced between them, tension tightening the air. "What's inside that transport?" Alina pressed. "Because you don't call me back for something routine." The officer's eyes flicked to the recruits, then back to her. For a moment the mask slipped, just long enough for them all to see the unease behind his carefully controlled face. He didn't answer. That silence was louder than any admission. Alina felt it in her chest, the way dread coils without permission. Whatever was in that convoy, it wasn't just weapons. The scarred woman leaned back, whispering under her breath, "She's right." The officer closed the folder with a snap. "You'll move out at 400, that's all you need to know." Chairs scraped. The recruits rose, but their eyes betrayed them. They weren't convinced. They felt the weight pressing on the air, the shadow of something unspoken. Alina didn't move. Not yet. She stayed behind as the room emptied, the officer gathering his papers in tight, frustrated motions. When the last recruit filed out, she spoke again. "If you think keeping them in the dark will protect them, you're wrong. It'll kill them faster." The officer froze, his hand clenched around the folder. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "You don't know what's at stake." Alina's eyes narrowed. "Try me." But he didn't. He left instead, brushing past her, his silence heavier than words. Alone in the dim room, Alina turned back to the map. Her fingers brushed the projected light where the convoy's route cut through the valley. She thought of choices, of orders, of what it meant to carry the consequences. She whispered to herself, so softly only the walls heard it, "Not again." Because once she had been here before, a different mission, a different lie, and the silence that followed still followed her everywhere. The night stretched long. Alina sat on her bunk, the barracks quiet around her. Outside, the wind scraped against the old windows. She cleaned her rifle slowly, each motion deliberate, as though she could scrub memory from metal. The recruits' voices echoed faintly from another room, laughter forced, conversations brittle. They were trying to be fearless, pretending tomorrow was just another drill. She envied them. Her hands stilled on the rifle. She closed her eyes. For a moment she let herself drift back, unwilling but powerless to stop it. Rain, a downpour so heavy it blurred her vision. Orders shouted through static-filled comms. A target confirmed, the green light given. And her finger on the trigger. But she hadn't pulled it. She had seen something, the outline of a child's figure moving through the shadows near the target house. She had hesitated. 1 second, 2, long enough for everything to unravel. The explosion had torn through the night anyway, because someone else hadn't hesitated. And the faces she couldn't save haunted her. That was the silence the courtyard had felt when she appeared. That was the weight stronger than command. Not glory, not rank, just the burden of a choice. She opened her eyes, staring at the rifle. Tomorrow they'd ask her to make another. A knock startled her. The door creaked open and the boy with the tense knuckles stepped in. His posture was stiff, as though he regretted the intrusion already. "Captain," he said softly, I need to ask you something." Elena set the rifle down, nodded. He lingered at the doorway. "When you said earlier about living with the wrong choice, did you mean—" He trailed off, words tangled in fear. She studied him, saw herself at his age, saw the question burning in him, the fear of being asked to carry something too heavy. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, "What are you most afraid of right now?" He swallowed hard. "Not dying," he said finally, his voice cracked on the word, "failing." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, that failure was inevitable, that survival was messy, that courage didn't erase regret. But she saw the boy standing there, barely a man, and knew he didn't need truth tonight. He needed something else. So she rose, stepped closer, and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Fear means you care," she said quietly. "That's not weakness. That's what keeps you human." His breath shuddered out. He nodded, blinking fast. Then he straightened his posture as though bracing himself. "Thank you, ma'am." When he left, the silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It carried his fear, and hers. She sat back on the bunk, the rifle gleaming under the dim light. Tomorrow the convoy would come. Tomorrow the lies would unravel. And she knew one thing with chilling certainty. Whatever waited in that valley wasn't just a mission. It was the past circling back. And this time, she couldn't afford to hesitate. Why does the world always hold its breath before dawn? The air was cold when Alina stepped out into the courtyard again, hours before first light. The silence carried weight, broken only by the faint hiss of wind against stone walls and the occasional cough from one of the guards posted at the gate. The outpost seemed to hover in that in-between space, too early for day, too late for night. She had always hated this hour. The body restless, the mind sharp, senses stretched taut as if the world itself knew something was about to happen. The recruits gathered slowly, their boots crunching against gravel, breath steaming in the cold. They moved with exaggerated confidence, as if each of them feared showing weakness in front of the others. Yet Alina could read them like open pages. The boy with the tense knuckles kept flexing his fingers, forcing blood into them. The scarred woman adjusted the strap of her pack 3 times in a row, her jaw set tighter than the night before. They were ready in gear, but not yet in soul. She remembered her first mission at their age, the fear she tried to bury under discipline, the way her heart had pounded so loud she was sure the enemy could hear it across the field. "Form up," the officer barked, stepping into the courtyard. His voice was sharp, but Alina heard the faint rasp under it. He was tired too. 2 squads assembled, weapons checked, radios tested. Engines of transport trucks hummed low, exhaust drifting white into the chill air. "Convoy enters the valley at approximately 600, the officer said. "We move now. North and south teams will position along the ridge. Navarro, you're with Alpha Squad." Elena gave no reaction, just slung her rifle and walked toward the designated truck. But inside, her thoughts burned. Why place her with the recruits? Why not with the veterans, those who already knew the rhythms of battle? Unless someone wanted her presence to be a test. She slid into the back of the truck, the metal bench cold beneath her. The scarred woman sat across, meeting her eyes briefly before looking away. The boy with the tense knuckles sat to her left, staring down at his boots, lips moving faintly as though in silent prayer. The engine rumbled and the truck lurched forward. The outpost gates creaked open, swallowing them into the pre-dawn dark. Alina rested her back against the rattling wall of the truck, her hand brushing the rifle's strap. She studied the recruits in silence, watching every nervous twitch. She could feel their questions clinging to the air, unsaid but heavy. What was really in that convoy? Why were they chosen? And why did Captain Navarro, this ghost of a woman with eyes too old for her face, carry herself as though she already knew the ending? The road curved through barren hills. Shadows stretched and shifted with every turn of the headlights. Dust swirled in clouds behind them, catching in their throats. No one spoke. Finally, the scarred woman broke the silence. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "earlier when you pressed the officer, you think there's more to this, don't you?" Elena's eyes lifted to hers, a simple nod. The recruits leaned in subtly, hungry for confirmation. "What do you think it is?" another soldier asked, his voice betraying the edge of fear he tried to hide. Elena didn't answer right away. She let the rattle of the truck fill the pause. Then she said quietly, "I think whatever's in that convoy isn't meant to be seen. Not by us. Maybe not by anyone." A ripple of unease passed through the group. The boy beside her whispered, "Then why send us?" Elena looked at him. His eyes were wide, desperate for an answer that made sense. She could have lied. She could have told him it was about trust or necessity or strategy, but lies were the officer's domain, not hers. "Because sometimes," she said, "command doesn't want survivors. They want witnesses to disappear." The words landed like stones. Silence pressed heavier. The boy swallowed hard, his knuckles whitening again. The scarred woman's jaw flexed, but she didn't flinch. She just stared harder at Elena, as though trying to measure the depth of truth in her words. The truck jolted over a rut, breaking the moment. Outside, the faintest streaks of gray touched the horizon, dawn creeping closer. Elena turned her gaze outward, but her mind was inward. She thought again of that night years ago, the child she thought she saw, the second she had hesitated, the explosion that followed. She had carried the guilt alone, but now she wondered if these recruits were being set up to carry theirs too. The convoy's outline appeared ahead, faint lights bobbing in the distance. Still miles away, but visible now. Her body tensed automatically, instincts sharpening. The officer's voice crackled through the radio. "Alpha Squad, dismount, move to position." The truck slowed, tires grinding against gravel. The back door swung open, cold air rushing in. Elena jumped down first, boots sinking into dust. The recruits followed, adjusting their gear, eyes flicking nervously between the shadows of the hills. She raised a hand, signaling silence. Then she led them upward toward the ridge. The ground crunched underfoot, rocks shifting loose. Every sound felt magnified. They spread out along the ridge, settling behind cover, boulders, low shrubs, jagged earth. Below, the valley stretched wide, a scar of barren dirt flanked by rising hills. The convoy would pass directly beneath them. Elena crouched low, pressing her cheek against the stock of her rifle. She scanned the horizon. Dust rose faintly from the convoy's lead vehicles. Armored trucks, too many for just a weapons transfer. The recruits whispered faintly among themselves. She caught fragments. "There's more of them than we thought. Why so heavy on escorts? What if she's right?" "Quiet," Elena hissed softly. They obeyed instantly, not because of rank, but because of the weight in her voice. The convoy drew closer. The rumble of engines rolled through the valley like distant thunder. The ground vibrated faintly beneath their knees. Elena adjusted her scope. Her finger hovered near the trigger, not touching, not yet. Through the glass, she scanned the trucks. Soldiers armed to the teeth, faces grim, and at the center, an armored container larger than the rest. Its plating gleamed dull silver even through the dust. Her breath caught. That wasn't standard military. That was something else. The scarred woman whispered, almost reverent, "What is that?" Elena didn't answer, because she didn't know. But deep in her gut, she felt the same dread she had felt years ago, the kind that whispers, "If you fire now, you'll regret it forever." The officer's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Alpha Squad, prepare to engage. On my mark." The recruits tightened their grips. Fingers hovered over triggers. Hearts beat fast enough she could almost hear them. Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. Her eyes stayed locked on that armored container. She whispered so soft only she heard it, "Not again." The officer barked, "Mark." Engines roared below, dust swirled, weapons lifted. And Alina didn't fire. Why did the courtyard go silent the moment she returned? The men and women who had seen combat, who had stared down gunfire, suddenly avoided her eyes. Some looked away in shame, others in awe, none in indifference. That silence clung like fog, heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. She kept walking, boots steady against cracked stone. Her shoulders carried more than her pack, more than her rifle. She carried memory, weight, and something invisible that pressed against everyone present, a presence no command could summon, no order could enforce. But she noticed something else. Behind the silence beneath the stairs lay whispers, quiet, broken, a name barely audible passed from lip to lip. Her name. Why now? Why like this? She didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't respond. Her face was calm, disciplined, the kind of calm that comes from years of swallowing storms inside. Yet inside, she felt the current pulling. She hadn't come here for them. She had come for the wounded, for the forgotten, for those who still fought battles no one saw. And maybe, in some unspoken way, she had come for herself. Later that night, the courtyard lights hummed. Old lamps buzzed faintly, cutting through shadows where soldiers leaned, smoked, muttered about tomorrow's mission. She sat on a bench, sharpening her blade with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound was steady, metal whispering against stone. It was more than preparation, it was ritual. Across from her, Corporal Anders lit another cigarette. His hands trembled. His face looked older than it was. He hadn't spoken to her directly in years. Not since the mission that went wrong. Not since they left her behind in the dust. Finally he asked, "Do you ever hear them?" Her hand paused. The blade stopped mid-stroke. "The ones we didn't bring back," he continued, voice low, almost ashamed. "At night, in the silence, I swear sometimes they're still walking beside me." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him, studied the exhaustion buried behind his eyes, the kind that no rest could cure. Then she said softly, "Every night." The courtyard fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was recognition, a truth that bound them all. The briefing room smelled of coffee and dust. The map spread across the table was marked with red circles, lines cutting through mountains and valleys. Commanders leaned over it, voices sharp, tense. She entered without a word. The air shifted. The colonel's voice faltered just for a second before resuming. He tried to pretend her presence didn't matter, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. Others followed. They remembered. She sat down at the edge of the table, hands folded, gaze steady, not asking to speak, not needing to. Her presence alone reshaped the room. Finally, someone asked the question hanging in the air. Why is she here? It wasn't an accusation. It was fear wrapped in curiosity. The colonel cleared his throat. She's here because she knows the ground better than anyone, knows the people, the villages, the ones we're walking into tomorrow. Silence. Everyone waited for her to explain, for her to defend herself. She said nothing, just let the quiet speak. And in that silence, they remembered why. Because the last time she'd led them through terrain like this, only half of them came back. And the half that survived owed it to her. But she hadn't told them everything, not yet. There was a reason she had returned now. A reason she walked back into the courtyard, carrying not just presence but warning. Because someone out there still waited. Someone tied to her past. And this mission wasn't just another operation. It was the one that would bring her face to face with the truth she had buried for years. A truth that no courtyard silence could erase. Why was the wind colder that morning? The desert never truly sleeps, but something about dawn felt different, heavier, like the air itself carried warning. She rose before the others, lacing her boots in silence, her fingers pausing briefly on the scar stitched across her wrist. A memory flickered there, sharp as broken glass. No one saw her eyes close. No one heard her whisper, barely audible, "Not again." The courtyard stirred behind her. Boots shuffled. Radios clicked. The low rumble of engines warming filled the edges of silence. The team gathered one by one, their faces painted with fatigue, tension, fear they wouldn't admit aloud. She watched them the way only someone who had carried loss could watch, not with judgment, with quiet recognition. And she wondered, not for the first time, which of them would not come back. On the ride out, the armored trucks rattled over uneven ground, dust clouds swallowing the horizon. Inside, the air was thick with sweat, oil, and unspoken thoughts. She sat near the back, rifle across her lap, helmet resting against her knee. She didn't speak, but every so often her gaze would flick toward the landscape, mapping it, remembering paths hidden under years of sand. The young private beside her, Daniels, barely 22, eyes too bright for war, finally broke the silence. "Ma'am, is it true?" She didn't look at him. "Is what true? That you walked back into fire for people who weren't even yours, that you carried them out, alone?" The others shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen, but their ears tilted toward her. She didn't answer immediately. Her thumb brushed the scar on her wrist again. Finally she said, "The story isn't the point." Daniels frowned. "Then what is?" Her eyes met his, calm, steady, but carved by storms he couldn't imagine. "The point is, we don't leave them behind, even when it costs us." The truck went silent again, but it wasn't empty silence. It was heavy, filled with the weight of something larger than words. When they reached the valley, the wind carried dust sharp enough to sting the eyes. The village ahead sat quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that spoke louder than gunfire. They dismounted. Boots sank into sand, crunching against scattered stones. The houses looked hollow, doors ajar, curtains stirring faintly. She felt it before anyone else did. The prickle on the back of her neck, the pulse quickening in her chest. The memory of another village, another time, when silence hid more than fear. She raised her hand. "Stop." The unit froze. Her eyes scanned the rooftops, the windows, the alleys. Shadows shifted where they shouldn't. And then the sound, faint, almost nothing, a click. "Down," she barked. The explosion tore through the air, heat searing, dust swallowing sight. The ground shook beneath them. Shouts rose, chaos splintering order. Smoke, blood, confusion. But through it all, her voice cut sharp, commanding without needing to shout. "Cover left." Anders Daniels moved the wounded, Martinez eyes high. They obeyed, not because of rank, because when she spoke, something inside them believed survival was possible. And for a moment, amidst fire and fear, they moved as one. Hours later, when the dust settled and the last echoes faded, the courtyard of that village looked almost the same as the one she'd walked into days before. Bodies carried. Silence heavier than walls. But this time she wasn't just carrying orders. She was carrying ghosts. Because among the ruins, hidden in the shadows, she had seen a face. Brief, fleeting, but impossible to mistake. A face from her past. Someone she thought gone forever. Someone tied to the day everything changed. And suddenly she knew. This mission wasn't about maps, terrain, or orders from men behind desks. This was personal. That night, under a canvas sky of stars dimmed by smoke, she sat alone, the firelight carving lines across her face. Anders approached, limping, arm bandaged. He dropped beside her, wincing as he lowered himself. He studied her for a long moment before asking quietly, "You saw something, didn't you?" She didn't answer. "I know that look," he pressed. "You freeze for half a breath like the world just punched you in the chest. I've seen it before, years ago, same eyes, same silence." Finally she whispered, "I saw him." Anders frowned. "Who?" Her jaw tightened. The fire cracked between them. "The one we lost, the one I couldn't bring back." Anders's breath caught. "That's impossible." She shook her head slowly. I thought so too. Silence stretched between them, heavy with disbelief and memory. He leaned forward, voice breaking. If he's alive, if it's really him, then this mission isn't what they told us. She didn't reply, she didn't have to. The truth was already unraveling. But sleep never came that night. When her eyes closed, she was back there years ago, same dust, same fire. She remembered the screaming, the collapsing walls, the impossible choice. She had carried 3 men out, but the fourth. She still heard his voice sometimes, calling out as the flames swallowed him. And she had lived with that sound, buried in her chest ever since. But now, if her eyes hadn't betrayed her, if her memory hadn't twisted, he was here, alive. And that meant everything she thought she knew about that day was a lie. The next morning, she didn't wait for orders. She walked into the courtyard, rifle slung across her back, pack strapped tight. The men and women around her froze, watching. No command had been given, no briefing called. But she moved with purpose, and something in her presence pulled them in. Daniels was the first to speak. "Where are we going?" She didn't answer. She just kept walking toward the edge of camp. And one by one they followed. Not because she told them to. Because when she walked, silence followed, and in that silence lived something stronger than command. Something that told them this was no longer about orders. This was about truth, about unfinished business, about redemption. And deep down, each of them wanted to see it through. The valley stretched ahead, endless, swallowing sound. The sun burned high, heat shimmering off stone. Their boots carried them forward, dust clinging to their faces, sweat tracing down their necks. And with every step, her mind replayed that glimpse, that face in the shadows. Her pulse throbbed, not with fear, with something sharper, hope twisted with guilt. Because if he was alive, then all these years, she had carried a ghost that wasn't a ghost at all. And now she would have to face him. To face the truth. And the truth would not be gentle. What was waiting in the ruins that pulled her forward with such quiet certainty? No one asked directly, but their eyes carried the questions. She felt them pressing against her back as they crossed the valley, each step sinking into silence. The wind howled between jagged rocks, dry and relentless. Sand clung to their uniforms, stinging eyes, scratching throats. The sun above burned mercilessly, but it wasn't the heat that wore them down. It was the weight of what they didn't know. She moved first, always ahead, scanning the ridges with slow precision. Every flick of her eyes, every pause in her step, made the others tense. They trusted her instincts more than their own. Daniels whispered once, voice barely audible, "What is she seeing that we do?" Anders answered with a shake of his head, "Not what she sees, what she remembers." By dusk they reached the edge of the village, not marked on their maps, not briefed in their orders. Its houses leaned against each other like tired old men, mud brick walls cracked, roofs half collapsed. She raised her fist, "Halt." The team froze. Her gaze lingered on the central courtyard, another courtyard, always the courtyards, where shadows pooled like waiting eyes. She whispered almost to herself, "It hasn't changed." Anders turned, "You've been here before." She didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. They set a perimeter. Radios clicked low. Breath hung heavy. The place felt too still, the kind of stillness that comes before storms. That night, as the others rested in shifts, she stayed awake, crouched near the broken well in the center of the village. The stars above were faint, smudged by drifting smoke from some distant fire. She stared at them, jaw tight, hands resting over her rifle. And then movement. A figure slipping between shadows at the far edge. Too tall to be a child, too deliberate to be stray livestock. Her heart clenched, the world narrowed. She rose slowly, carefully. Her boots barely touched the earth. And for a single breath, the firelight caught his face. Her throat closed. It was him. older, scarred, but undeniably him. Her chest burned with 1,000 emotions she had buried. Relief, guilt, disbelief, anger, something dangerously close to hope. But before she could move, he disappeared back into shadow. And she stood frozen, rifle heavy in her hands, pulse pounding in her ears. At dawn, the team gathered around ration packs, tired and wary. She hadn't slept, her face showed it. Daniels noticed first, "You saw something." The others looked up, tension crackled. Anders leaned forward, "Tell them." She hesitated, the words weighed too much, but lies weighed more. Finally she said quietly, "Someone survived from before." Confusion spread across their faces. "From what?" Martinez asked. She drew in a slow breath. "From the fire years ago, the day we thought everyone was gone, I saw him." Silence. Daniels frowned. "But that's not possible," records said. "Records lie," she cut in, voice sharper than she meant. Then softer, almost breaking, "I left him behind." The admission hung in the air like smoke. No one moved, no one spoke. Until Anders finally murmured, "Then maybe this whole mission isn't what we think it is." They didn't pack to leave, they packed to search. Moving through the abandoned village, each alley felt like a memory waiting to strike. Every broken door, every cracked wall, reminded her of choices that carved scars deeper than any bullet. Her unit didn't complain, though unease grew with every step. They didn't know this man, didn't know the story behind her silence. But they followed anyway, because her presence demanded it. By mid-afternoon, Martinez found tracks, not military boots, sandals worn thin, the kind villagers made from scrap leather, but the stride was strong, purposeful, leading into the hills. Her stomach twisted. She knew that stride. Once it had walked beside her. Once it had carried the weight of their entire unit when her own legs had almost given out. And now it was pulling her into the past she thought she'd buried. She whispered to herself, "He's alive." Anders overheard. "If he is, then why hasn't he come to us? Why hide?" Her jaw clenched. The answer cut sharper than any blade. "Because I left him." The hills rose like jagged teeth, shadows stretching long as the sun fell low. Their boots scraped rock, rifles heavy across their shoulders. At one ridge, Daniel stumbled, breath ragged. She paused, turned, offered her canteen. He hesitated, then took it. For a moment he looked at her differently, not as a soldier, as a person carrying something too heavy to name. He asked quietly, "Was he someone important to you?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted to the horizon, where shadows bled into fire-red sky. Finally she said, "He was more than that. He was the reason I believed I could make it home, and the reason I've never forgiven myself." Daniels didn't speak again. He just kept walking, quieter now, as though her words had shifted the ground beneath his boots. By nightfall they reached the ridge overlooking a ravine. A fire burned faintly below, tucked against stone walls. Figures moved around it, not soldiers, not armed patrols, civilians, scarred, thin, weary survivors. And among them she saw him again. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He was alive. Not a ghost, not a memory twisted by exhaustion. Alive. But he wasn't the same. His eyes scanned the firelight like someone who trusted nothing. His shoulders carried weight heavier than any pack. He moved like a man who had built a life out of survival, not orders. And she realized she wasn't just here to find him. She was here to face what she had done. The team huddled behind rocks, whispering. Anders spoke first. "If those are civilians, what are they doing out here? Why weren't they in the reports?" "Because command doesn't want them in the reports," Martinez muttered. Daniels looked between them uneasy. "So what now? Do we make contact?" Their eyes turned to her. The unspoken truth settled over them. This was no longer about maps or orders. This was her mission now. And in her silence, in the way her hands trembled just slightly, they saw the truth. This wasn't just about him. It was about her. She stared down at the fire, the flicker painting his face in half-shadows. Her throat tightened. Years of silence, of guilt, of unanswered questions pressed against her ribs, demanding release. But a deeper question gnawed at her. If he saw her now, would he recognize her? Or would he see only the woman who had left him to burn? That night stretched endless. The team shifted in uneasy sleep, but she stayed awake, eyes fixed on the fire below. Every crackle of flame carried her back. Every shadow across his face pulled at wounds she thought had scarred. And as dawn painted the sky in bruised purple, she knew one thing. She couldn't run from this anymore. She had to go down there. Had to face him. Even if his eyes no longer carried forgiveness. Even if his voice broke her in ways bullets never could. Because some battles weren't fought with weapons. They were fought with silence, memory, and the courage to face what you tried to bury. And for the first time in years, she was afraid. Truly afraid. Not of dying, but of being seen. Why did her legs feel heavier now, when she had marched for miles carrying more weight than any pack could hold? The ravine below was just stone and firelight, yet each step toward it felt like wading into a storm she had avoided for years. Her team watched silently from the ridge. No one tried to stop her. No one offered advice. They understood somehow that this wasn't their moment, it was hers. She adjusted the strap of her rifle across her shoulder, though she knew she wouldn't raise it tonight. This wasn't a mission you could complete with bullets. The slope down was treacherous, loose rock shifting under boots, dust sliding in small avalanches. Each slip echoed louder than it should have. The figures by the fire stirred, their heads turning. By the time she reached the bottom, silence had spread among them. Civilians with hollow cheeks, scarred arms, and eyes that spoke of too many winters stared at her. Some clutched makeshift weapons. Others shrank back into the dark. But one stood still. His eyes locked on hers. And for the first time in years, time itself seemed to stop. He didn't move, didn't speak. The fire between them crackled, throwing light and shadow across a face she knew as well as her own. Older now, weathered, but unmistakably him. Her throat closed. She whispered, barely audible, Elias. The name trembled in the air like a confession. For a moment nothing, then his jaw tightened, his eyes didn't soften. You shouldn't be here, he said flatly. The words cut sharper than a blade. She took a step forward. You're alive. His gaze didn't waver, and you left me. Her breath caught. Around them, the civilians shifted, glancing between the two like witnesses at a trial they didn't understand. Her hands shook at her sides. I thought you were. Dead, he interrupted, voice cold, brittle. That's the story you told yourself to sleep at night, isn't it? The fire popped. Sparks spiraled upward, vanishing into the dark. She felt her knees weaken but stood firm. I carried 3 men out that day. I tried. You chose, he snapped, stepping closer. The firelight revealed scars twisting across his left arm, burns that clawed up his neck. Don't dress it as fate. Don't pretend the building fell too fast. You looked at me. You looked, his voice cracked, breaking the ice for just a second, and you turned away. Her eyes burned. I came back. Too late. Silence fell heavy. The only sound was the low hiss of flame, the restless shuffle of feet. Her chest heaved with words she couldn't release. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for years, begged for it in nightmares. But standing in front of him now, everything collapsed. Finally, she said, I never stopped hearing your voice. His eyes flickered just briefly, then hardened again, and I never stopped hearing the silence after you left. Her heart cracked. She wanted to fall, to beg, to explain, but explanation felt like poison. So she stood, shoulders trembling, fighting to hold herself together. Behind her she felt movement on the ridge. Anders, Daniels, the others watching, waiting. They couldn't hear the words, but they saw the weight in every gesture. She wasn't their leader tonight. She was just a woman drowning in her own past. But Elias turned from her, staring into the fire. His voice softened, but not with mercy, with exhaustion. Do you know what it's like to claw through rubble with your bare hands? To scream until your throat tears, knowing no one's coming back? To watch everything you believed in burn while you— His voice faltered. He swallowed hard. While you walked away. Tears blurred her vision. She blinked hard, refusing to let them fall where others could see. I thought I lost you, she whispered. I thought you were gone if I had known. You didn't want to know, he said bitterly. It was easier to bury me with the others, easier to carry guilt than the truth. Her knees almost buckled. He was right. In the darkest parts of her mind, she had clung to the narrative of his death, because believing he was alive, abandoned, betrayed, was unbearable. And now here he was, proof, living proof that her silence had been cowardice all along. The civilians shifted uneasily. One woman stepped forward, her face lined with age and hardship. She placed a hand on Elias' arm. Enough, she said quietly. This isn't the time. But Elias shook her off, his eyes burning into the woman across the fire. Why are you here now? He demanded. What do you want from me? Forgiveness? Closure? You think walking back into my life erases years of ash and blood? She shook her head quickly, desperate. No, I don't want forgiveness. I don't deserve it. He froze, taken aback by the bluntness. She stepped closer, voice breaking. I came because I saw you, because I couldn't keep hiding from the truth, because the ghosts I carried were never ghosts at all. They were you, always you. The words poured out raw, unguarded. Her hands trembled at her sides, her whole body trembling like a soldier stripped of armor. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Elias whispered, almost too soft to hear, Do you know what kept me alive all these years? Her breath caught. What? The hope, he said bitterly, that one day you'd come back, that maybe you hadn't left me, that maybe there was a reason. I clung to that like air, and when the hope finally died, he shook his head. So did everything else. She felt the words hit like a bullet. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. He stared at her for a long moment, then he turned away. Sorry doesn't change what you did. But the firelight flickered between them. She wanted to collapse, to scream, to explain that she had been one soldier, one choice, one human in a storm of fire. But maybe explanation was cowardice too. So she stood, silent, steady, letting him see the cracks, the weight, the years of carrying him inside her chest. Finally, he looked back, and for the briefest moment, his eyes softened, not with forgiveness, but with recognition. He saw her, not the soldier, not the silence. Sorry. And that was enough to keep her standing. On the ridge above, Anders shifted uneasily. Daniels whispered, Is she going to bring him back? Anders shook his head slowly. She's not here to bring anyone back. She's here to face what can't be undone. The boy frowned. Then what's the point? Anders's eyes lingered on her silhouette by the fire, trembling but unbroken. The point, he said quietly, is sometimes the hardest battles aren't about winning. They're about showing up. As the night stretched on, she and Elias sat on opposite sides of the fire, words exhausted, silence louder than anything. Civilians dozed around them, wrapped in blankets of rags. Her team kept watch above, shadows against the ridge. And in the crackle of flames, in the weight of unspoken years, she realized something. She might never be forgiven. She might never rewrite that day. But she had shown up. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The courtyard was silent now. No orders barked. No footsteps hurried. Just the weight of what had been carried here, the memory of her. They still spoke of her presence, not like a soldier who had simply done her duty, but like a force that had entered and altered the air itself. She was gone, but the way she had stood in those last days, it had left something behind. Something heavier than metals, something stronger than command. Why did they keep replaying her final walk across the stones? Because no one could explain it fully. Men and women hardened by war admitted it felt like time bent, as though the courtyard itself knew her footsteps were writing their last story. And yet she hadn't said a word, not in the end. Only her silence remained sharper than any speech. She had not wanted this, not the reverence, not the shadows she cast. Her fight had been against forgetting, against leaving others behind, against allowing duty to devour the heart that once beat under her ribs. And yet, in saving them, she had become the one name no one could speak without a pause. That pause was her true legacy. The mission had ended with fractured maps and broken lines of communication, but the fragments told a story. A small convoy alive because she refused to abandon them. A courtyard filled with soldiers whose courage had run dry until she simply walked past, not shouting, not commanding, just moving. Her presence pulled their courage back from hiding, and they still asked themselves how. Maybe it was because she had known loss deeper than orders ever could. She carried silence not as emptiness, but as proof that pain could be endured, not erased. When she glanced at another soldier, they felt it. She knew their fear. She carried their ghosts, and yet she kept walking. Later, when the official reports were written, her name barely appeared. Operative support, sniper cover, evacuation delay. Words stripped of blood and cost. History rarely records heartbeats, but those who had stood near her never forgot. They said when she lowered her rifle, the silence around her grew thicker, like even war itself gave her room. Her backstory leaked out in fragments. A brother lost in a desert long before this war began. A promise made at a grave no one else visited. She had entered uniform not to prove strength, but to keep his memory breathing. That was why she never sought medals. They could never weigh as much as the folded flag she carried once, alone. In the final mission, when the courtyard froze, she chose not to speak, because words would have cracked, because no speech could carry what she already bore. Silence was her strength. Silence was her confession. Silence was her farewell. Others who had followed her returned broken, trying to explain her last look, her last pause at the threshold. Some said it was grief. Some said it was resolve. Some whispered it looked like forgiveness. No one agreed, but all of them carried it home like an echo that never fades. Years passed. The courtyard changed. New recruits marched across it, never knowing the stones had once carried someone whose presence had stilled time. But the veterans still returned, quietly, sometimes placing a hand against the wall, sometimes whispering her name only once, then falling silent again. They didn't need a monument. The air still held her. One evening, an old comrade stood there with his daughter. She asked why everyone grew quiet near this place. He didn't give her the whole story. He only said, because once someone stronger than any command walked here, and we've been learning from her silence ever since. The girl didn't fully understand, but years later, when she faced her own moment of fear, she remembered, and she stood straighter, and she chose not to run. That was how legacies move, not in books, but in borrowed strength. What she left behind was not just survival. It was something heavier, a reminder that dignity does not always shout, that presence does not need permission, that love for the wounded, the forgotten, the voiceless can be fiercer than strategy. Sometimes the greatest victories are invisible. Sometimes the courtyard remembers more than the reports, and sometimes silence says everything. Her story ended in quiet, but quiet was enough. Because long after commands fade and orders are forgotten, one truth remains sometimes: dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And that silence still walks, even now.